Welcome to session number 10 of FileMaker Group Therapy for Citizen Developers. My name is Tim Jones, and our topic for this session is Save Records as PDF. On today's agenda, we're going to talk about the Save Records as PDF command, not just talk about it, but perform it both manually and from a scripted standpoint. And we're going to learn about how to automate that process of scripting it out. In the process, we'll learn some script techniques like using variables, how to generate valid file paths for desktop and server and iOS and WebDirect. In that process, we'll also learn how to remove illegal characters with the substitute function. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll jump into my FileMaker database that we've been building throughout these sessions, our animal care. Let me blank out the screen behind. There we go. And I've added some things to this file, even as of just a few minutes ago. So if you want to download the file afresh and play along, you're welcome to, or use it as you review these techniques later on your own time. I'll put the link in the video description on YouTube. So I've added, for example, this actions menu has a new name. It was called lists, I think, previous to that. And I've added a command called invoice PDF. This invoice PDF script will, well, let me just show it to you really quickly. It's going to run this script here, generate treatment invoice. Okay. What I've got this script set to do is, first of all, perform our script startup script. The script startup script is simply a script that I write to set the stage for almost every other script that's going to be run throughout a project. And it will set the error capture to on, which suppresses system error messages. It will set the allow user abort capability to off, which means users cannot abort out of a script when it's in process. And I've added another step called close popover. And this, as you can see, this actions button is a popover button, and that popover, I want it to close up. If there's not a popover open when a script performs the close popover statement, there's no problem whatsoever. It doesn't cause any problems. Okay, back to the generating of this treatment invoice script. It's going to try to generate an invoice for the current visit. Obviously, that's why I put it here on the visit form layout. It's going to try to generate an invoice for all the treatments performed during this animal's visit to our animal care center. As part of the process, it's going to have to go to the related treatment line records where we specified all of the different treatments. And I believe that we learned how to build this report in our last session using sub-summary parts. So this script is going to go to the related set of records for this visit, traveling down this relationship from visit through treatment to treatment line, and it'll display those records in the treatment line invoice layout. You'll notice something that I've done interesting here, perhaps. Whenever you use the go to related record script step, there's no guarantee that there are any related records, right? And so you always want to couch that go to related record script step inside an if statement where you first count to see if there are any related records, because something really bad can happen if there aren't. What happens if there are no related records is this go to related record script step doesn't go anywhere. Generally, and I'll double click on it so you can see the dialog box, generally the go to related record script step tries to both find a batch of records and by traversing a relationship, and then show those records in the specified layout, okay? If it doesn't find any records, likewise, it doesn't go to that layout. So it stays in the current layout. And that can be disastrous. Why? Because, well, what if the very next step that you issue in your script is delete all those records? Yikes. Well, not knowing if the go to related record script step actually went to that other table, that child table, well, or that related table, I should say, it would be very unwise to just say, okay, now delete all those records, because well, you don't know if it actually went there or not. And if it didn't go there, if it stayed on the current layout, now you've just issued a command to delete all the records in the current table, not in that related table like you had intended with the script. So very simply, couch your go to related record script steps inside an if statement that just counts to see if there are any records in that relationship. And you notice how it's the same relational path from visit through treatment down to treatment line that I reference in the go to related record script step. Visit, treatment, treatment line. You have to specify a field to be counted. And so I always specify the primary key field, which I call ID. You don't even have to say is greater than 0 like that to see if there are any records, because the if statement, the if script step that we're using here, simply wants to know or simply wants to get a statement that's either true or false. I think we've talked about this in previous sessions. In Boolean terms, wonderful mathematician George Boole came up with this idea. Let's give numerical equivalents to true and false, right? Let's say false is the numerical equivalent of 0, and true is the numerical equivalent of 1, or really any non-zero, but let's just stick with zeros and ones, it's easier. But if this function, if we go and count the number of populated ID fields down that relationship, if it's 0, well, 0 means false. So basically we're saying if false, and then it's not going to perform this statement. Whereas if the count comes back with a non-zero number, like 1 or higher, then that's the numeric equivalent of true. So you don't have to say greater than 0, although it doesn't hurt anything if you do. In a situation where you're trying to determine whether something's true or false, 0 is the equivalent of false, and non-zero is the equivalent of true. So we say, all right, if there are related records over there, then go to them. And if there are not, then exit out of this script. We're done. There's no invoice to show because there were no treatments performed during that visit. If we get down to here now, that means that there must have been related records, and we are in those related records, and we're in the treatment line invoice. So then we'll simply sort the records in the order that they need to be sorted in to display the subsummary properly. We'll set our page setup settings correctly. This particular report wants to be portrait and US letter sized paper. So I've got those settings here in print setup. There we go, US letter size paper and portrait orientation. And then we'll just take the user into preview mode so that they can see the report. And then I've written this other little script that will simply size the window appropriately and center it on the screen. Okay, and that script looks like this: size and center window. It says, okay, let's first adjust the window to be just right for its content. But then I've noticed that if a window is displayed in list view, if records are being displayed in list view, the window gets as tall as the entire screen, and I just don't like that. So I've written some code in here that will shorten up the window by about 100 pixels and then center it vertically, putting its top down at 50 pixels down from the top of the screen. Okay. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this later if there's time, but this is just a routine that I've cooked up to make the window, to make any given window that I want, size itself appropriately for the content and center itself on the screen vertically and horizontally. I should mention, if you're wondering, well, wait a minute, where'd the new window come from? The go to related record script step has an option that says pop open these related records in this layout in a new window. And so as I double click on this statement again, we can see that I did turn on that show in new window option. And it's wonderful because then the user can look at that report and they can simply close it when they're done. We don't have to keep them in the scripted process so that they can hit some continue button to be taken back to where they were. Popping open reports like this in their own window provides a very easy, user-friendly way to present reports, but not to lose the user's context. You can see that when you specify those options too, you can even choose what kind of window it will be. You can give the window a unique name. Here's where we specify what layout we want to show those related records in. You can even size and position the window appropriately and control the window options, or the Chrome as we call it. And you can see how I've taken away the user's ability to minimize or maximize this window, or even to resize it. And let's say we don't even need a menu bar showing, which would apply on the Windows platform only, but we do want the toolbar that normally appears. Okay, so then we will have sorted, printed, or done our print setup, our page setup settings, preview, size, and center the window. Let's run that script and see what we get. I'll go ahead and save the changes that I made while just tinkering around. And run the script. And this is the result. Now, it appeared over on my other screen, and so I had to move it over. It's not quite sized the way I would want it to because it sized itself for the other screen. But we've got this nice looking report. Okay. I'm going to use the save as PDF command now so we can see, all right, well, what is it going to look like to try to automate the saving of this PDF? There's a save as PDF button here when we're in preview mode, or if you're in browse mode, you can go File, Save Send Records as PDF. It normally doesn't take this long. There we go. Let's notice the things that we can set about a PDF as we're saving it manually. Obviously, we're required to give it a file name that ends in .pdf. Likewise, we're expected to choose a location, a target folder where we want to save this file. We can choose whether we want all the records in the current found set to be included in the PDF report, or just one record, the current record. If we can also choose blank record, but that'd be a little more for, if we were the designer and trying to print a skeleton copy of a layout. We can also specify some after saving options, like once this PDF has been saved, automatically open it up, and or create an email message in my default email client software like Outlook or Apple Mail with this PDF file already attached to the email message. Lastly, we've got some options we can specify over here. As I click the options button, you see that PDFs support some metadata, meta tags, like what title, which is different than and can be more comprehensive than the file name. What title would you like applied to this PDF? What's the subject matter? Who's the author? Any keywords you want to add? You can also apply security settings to require passwords for various things. And you can set the initial view. This is one of my favorite capabilities, to be able to control what the zoom level is on the PDF when it first opens. Right? We can say, hey, zoom out to where it'll fit the entire first page of the PDF report in the user's default PDF viewer software application, or in other words, fit it on their screen. Lots of other options there, as well as how do you want them to be able to navigate the pages, either single page, one at a time, continuous, where they can scroll across the page breaks to scroll down or up, facing pages, 2 pages, and so forth. Okay. So lots of good options there, some of which can be automated, like the meta tags. All right, those are the issues now that we have to tackle if we're going to try to automate the creation of a PDF. Now, as we go about the process of automating the outputting of this report, let's keep in mind that the process of outputting reports is not specific to this one report. We potentially may have this database generate dozens of reports as we continue to build it up. Therefore, we should create a separate script that will serve to output any report. Code modules, modularization, little blocks of code that perform common tasks that we then call from other scripts when we need those tasks performed. That's good programming. using modularization, little blocks of code that perform focused tasks that you can then call when needed from other scripts. And the benefit, of course, is that when we think up a great new idea of how the task of, in this case, outputting reports should be performed, we only have to go to one place to make those improvements. We go to one place, make the changes, and all of a sudden now our outputting of reports has been improved for all of those dozens of reports that call the script to output. I'm going to get into our script workspace, and we were working with this script right here, right? But I'm going to add a new script as well. Let me go ahead and make this one stay visible on screen, and we'll add a new one. We'll call it output report. Now, I should have used my best practices here and used my script template. Sorry, let me delete that output report script for a second. Yes, it's being closed, saved. We'll save it first, then we'll delete it. I've made this lovely script template, so I'm going to duplicate that script to get a good head start on this new one. There we go, that's better. And we'll call it output report. And I won't take the time to type in the description of what this script will do, but obviously I've got comments in my script template that make it easy to, at a glance, see the purpose of a script, to see how this script is going to be triggered. In fact, I'll go ahead and say there, called by other scripts that need to generate output. And expected parameters, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Every one of my scripts, with almost no exceptions, will trigger the script startup script. That's the one that we saw earlier that sets error capture to on, sets user abort to off, and closes any popover windows that are open. And then below that, we'll come down here and say, all right, first, let's show a custom dialog box, SCD. We'll show a custom dialog box and we'll ask the user how they want to output this report. I'll call it output options, and we'll say, would you like to view, print, or create a PDF of the current report? And we'll make the default button view. They do that most often. And then we'll say print will be next and PDF will be third. We're not going to have any input fields. We're not gathering any data from them. We're just asking them a question, giving them one of three possible answers to use. So we can turn off the committing of data, which only has to do with input fields. All right. Then we'll need to check to see how they responded. And so since we're going to use their response in several different contexts, I'm going to go ahead and capture their response as a variable. The set variable script step, SV is the abbreviation, of course, allows us to create a variable. A variable is just a storage place in memory that remembers some piece of information for you that you can then use later. Variables start with either a single $sign or a double $sign. The single $sign means that you want this variable to be a local variable, only known within the current script. A double $sign would mean that you want it to be a global variable where it's known throughout the whole file and it continues to live beyond just the length of the duration of the running of this script. It continues to live until you actually close the database for that session. The get function that I've used here, get last message choice, is just one of those wonderful little get functions that returns whatever button number the user clicked in the most recently responded to custom dialog box. So get last message choice will figure out whether they clicked number 1 or 2 or 3. Okay. And Tom's got a question. Should we be checking the run with full access privileges by default? Tom, I would say absolutely not. Giving full access privileges on every script is kind of a little bit too much carte blanche, a little too much, too cavalier, I'd say, with your security permissions. You don't necessarily want every script to give every user full access privileges. So think it through on a script by script basis. Excellent question.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, after we've captured their response to our dialog box in a variable called output, then we'll check to see which button they clicked. So if, and I'll type the name of the variable, $output equals #1. And then for my own sake, I like to add a little comment after that, which means they chose view on screen, right? That's what button #1 was. If I include my little comments here, again, 2 forward slashes when you write calculations means the rest of that line is yours to do with whatever you want. You can add whatever comments that you like as just notes to yourself. That way I don't have to go back and constantly be looking, oh, what was button #1? Oh yeah, that was the view button. Button #2 was print, button #3 was PDF. I've got it right here in my if statements. So if they said, I want to view on screen, then we're just going to bail out of the script. We're just going to say, all right, then everything is already as it should be. The report is viewed in preview mode in its own window. We'll just get out of this script and let them look at it to their heart's content. Else if the user responded by clicking button #2, that was our print button, then we're going to use the print command, of course, and we'll leave the dialog box on so that they can choose which printer they want to print to, how many copies they want, what page range, and so forth. Okay? We're not going to try to overly automate or specify print options because it's too particular to the job and to the user. If they didn't click button #2 or button #1, which button did they click? Button #3. So I don't need an else if, just an else will handle it because there were only 3 ways they could have dismissed this dialog box. Button #1, 2, or 3. So if they clicked button #3, what did they choose? They chose PDF. And so we're going to use the save records as PDF, SRAP, the abbreviation or initials for that script step. By default, it comes in with the with dialog switch set to on, which means it's going to show the save records as PDF dialog box, and with the create folders switch set to off, which means we're not giving it permission to create new folders on the user's storage system. Okay, I'll go ahead and save the script, and let's run it again. Okay. Oh, we also need to, my apologies, now that we've written that output report script, we also need to come in and add a statement to our generate treatment invoice script that says, hey, go over and perform that output report script. We wouldn't have seen anything different here if we had not specified to perform the output report script. There we go. Okay, so we get everything in place. We size and position the window. Then we're going to say, okay, now go and output this by running the output report script. All right, let's see what we get. Actions, invoice PDF, which runs the script to generate the PDF, which resulted in this. Let me size this window actually if I can. I can't because there's a dialog box open. All right, there's that, and the script has caused this dialog box to appear. Now, for this first run through, I'll go ahead and just click the view button and we can see what will happen. I'll click view, and it simply concludes the script, and we can then happily look at our PDF and see how it looks. Or not PDF, look at our report in native FileMaker in preview mode and see how it looks. At that point, the user is then free, of course, to print or save as PDF. This time, I'll run it again, but I'll choose the PDF option. Okay, so the window has appeared and the dialog box has appeared. We'll say PDF, and it opens up the Save Records as PDF dialog box. We talked about all the different options here. I'm not going to bother saving the PDF at this point. We'll do enough of that as we go along. And now let's take a look at the options that we have when automating that PDF. And we'll talk about each one of them in turn. So in this Save Records as PDF dialog box that you see pictured here on the slide, we can automate, and in fact, we will need to automate the file path. That is, where do we want to save this PDF? The file name, what do we want to call this PDF? The records being browsed option, right? Because that might be different from one report to another. Some reports, you're only trying to print one record or include one record in the output PDF. The options, those meta tags that we saw, maybe the initial view settings, the after saving options. What do you want to have happen? Automatically open the file or create an email with it attached. Do we want to allow the creation of new folders? And do all of these things work on every device? Well, the truth is, no, they don't all work on every device. Okay. So first off, the problem of the file path and name. Though the file path and name that we specify, that we choose or build, has to be platform agnostic, which means it needs to work on a Windows user's computer, on a Mac user's computer, under iOS. It also needs to be client compatible. That is, it needs to work with FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Go, WebDirect if possible. FileMaker Server can be set to run scripts on a scheduled basis. So Server can even run scripts, right? And if we're going to generate reports, we need to make sure that our file path and name will work under all possible scenarios. Well, in order to generate a platform agnostic file path and name, let me show you some examples that FileMaker gives us of valid file paths and names. We can see them inside the orange box here in the screenshot. You'll notice that one of them is Mac specific, the one that says FileMac : da 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 da. Two of them are Windows specific, FileWin, and then the rest of the path. But there is a way to create a relative path, and that's where you simply use the prefix of file : and that will work under all platforms. Okay? The file prefix will be successful under Mac, under Windows, under iOS. There's also a way, notice that we can use a variable to store the file path and file name that we would like to use. And that's going to be essential to us because the names that we want to assign will be different in probably every different report that we run through this output report script. And so we're going to be creating a variable whose value is a relative path. And we can use some really useful tools, some of the get functions in this process. For example, there's a get function called getDesktopPath. It will go out and return the path to the current user's desktop. Now, when I say the current user, we all use Macs or PCs, and our desktop actually lives inside a folder that's named after our username. So, if Bob is using the database, his desktop path is going to include the name Bob in it, whereas mine would include the name Tim. There's also getDocumentsPath that will find for us the right path name to our documents folder, which is also a subfolder of our user folder or of our home folder. There's a getTemporaryPath folder. This one is just wonderful because FileMaker can create a temporary folder for the sake of storing files like the PDFs that you'll create and other kinds of files. And then every time you exit out of FileMaker, the temporary folder is deleted. It becomes a self-purging temporary storage folder. Whereas if we store all of the PDFs that we create or that a user creates by running our scripts on their desktop, they've got to then go and throw those away when they're all done with them. Or likewise in their documents folder, they have to manage the deletion of all of those PDFs if they don't need them anymore. Maybe they were just trying to generate one so that they could email it out, and then they don't need the file once it's been emailed out. So I like getTemporaryPath. That's a fantastic solution. Keep in mind that the prefix is not included when we use these three get functions. So we're going to need to remember to use file : the prefix, manually as part of our formula. And then lastly, we'll use forward slashes to separate folder names from other folder names and file names, which is different than Windows, which uses a backslash, or than a Mac, which uses a colon. Forward slashes between folders is called the FileMaker path style, right? That's the way the FileMaker generates a path or enunciates a path. All right, now keep in mind also that these three get functions, they're not all compatible with every FileMaker client. FileMaker Pro is the only one that offers full support for all three of them. In FileMaker Go, there's no such thing as a desktop. So the get desktop path function does not work in FileMaker Go, nor does it work in FileMaker Server. And nothing works in WebDirect. Ugh, why not? Simply this, because WebDirect doesn't have the power to access the user's file system, their hard drive, in other words. WebDirect has no ability to access the hard drive of the user who's accessing our database through a web browser. Okay, so we've got to keep that in mind as we build these processes. All right, let's go ahead and create a valid file path and name. I'll switch back into the FileMaker database, and we'll jump back into our script workspace and into our output report script. I think we're probably done with that script. And we're going to turn this with dialog to off so that the dialog box will not show. We'll need to therefore automate all of it, all the necessary bits. And then here, in front of the save records as PDF command, we're going to add a set variable statement. And that set variable statement we'll use to create a variable. I'll call it $FilePath. And the value of this variable needs to be a valid path name or path and file name to where we want to store this script. Okay. I'll use the let function because it's going to give us all sorts of wonderful advantages. And go and put the parentheses on their own line, which is, I like that. And the square brackets are needed, like so. All right. We're going to start by creating a variable here. This is a let variable, a function variable, not a script variable. We'll call it path. These do not need to be prefixed with a $sign because these variables, function variables, are only going to exist during the running of this one little calculation. They're not even going to live longer than their own statement, the set variable statement in which they live. We'll say let there exist a variable called path, and we'll set its value to the get DocumentsPath function. That is, hey FileMaker, go and find out the path to the current user's documents folder, whoever's running this script, who's ever using this database to generate an invoice. And then we'll create another variable called name, and we'll set it to be equal to, let's say we want our reports to be named using the name of the layout that the report is being generated in, and then maybe the date and time. Right? That way it's going to be very specific. If the user runs the same report multiple times, they'll get multiple PDFs because they'll be time-stamped right down to the very second. And so we'll say get layout name ampersand, which is our concatenation symbol, you all know that, and a space, ampersand, and then we'll use the get current timestamp function, get current timestamp. As opposed to get current host timestamp, which would use the time and day of the host computer where the FileMaker database is hosted, let's use local timestamp so that it's specific to the end user. If they're on the East Coast, it'll be in East Coast time. Okay. Then, now that we've set those two temporary function variables, we'll come down here and say, okay, now our final result of this let calculation will be the word file and a colon. We saw those as the necessary prefix for the file path, and then path, which is our variable from up above, and name, which is our second variable from up above, and then since these are all going to be PDFs that are being output, we'll say and quote dot PDF end quote. So we've got the necessary prefix, and then the path to the user's documents folder will go right here. Then the name of the layout and today's date and time right there. And then the .pdf file name extension. We'll say okay there and okay, and I'll save the script. And then let's run it. And we'll use the script debugger and we'll see what happens. Okay. let's see, I set it to off. Oh, sorry, one other thing we need to do first, of course. We need to then tell the save records as PDF command to output to the destination of FilePath. So I'll click the gear, we'll say specify output file, and we'll say, all right, we're going to use this variable file path option where we enter a variable. $output is what I called that variable, right? No, $file path is what I called that variable. There we go. That's better. Output was the custom message dialog box response. File path is the variable that we created on the previous line to store the path to and the name of the file that we want to have created by this save records as PDF command. Specify options, I can go in there as well, records being browsed, and let's say we want the initial view to just show pages at a fit page magnification. Okay, save the script and run the script. We'll use the script debugger and the data viewer, and we'll run our script. Okay, clicking the actions button, invoice PDF runs the script. We're going to jump into that generate treatment invoice script. That's going to then call the script startup script, which we've already debugged, so we'll just go ahead and let it run, but without going into its lines of code using the step over. If there are related records, go to those related records in a new window. It pops open the new window. Otherwise, exit the script, which it didn't do. Sort those records, set the page setup settings, go to preview mode, and then run our size and center window script, which I'll just go ahead and let it run without looking at the individual lines, which that window appeared on the other screen. So I'll move it over into place so you can see it. There we go. And now we get to our output report script. Okay, here we go. Step into it. It sets or tries to run the script startup script. That's fine. Show custom dialog. What do we want to do? We want to generate a PDF of this report. And now the statement that sets the output variable, we'll show you that there. It just said, oh, he clicked button number 3. Okay, fine. Good. And we get to the else. We'll set a variable called file path. Here, let me move the data viewer off to the side a little bit so you can see this happen at the same time. Go, and it creates a variable called file path whose content or value is this. I'll double click on it. We can see, all right, we got our file prefix, and then the path to my documents folder is all of this business here. And then comes the layout name, and then a space, and then the current timestamp, date and time, and then the .pdf. Okay, now, do any of you see any potential problems with that right there as a file name? Well, there are some. This isn't going to work, okay? But that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it. So as now we come to the save records as PDF command, and it's going to try to use that text that I just showed you as the destination, file path, and name. We're going to get an error 800. It's unable to create the file on the disk because that was an invalid file path. You see, colons and forward slashes are not allowed in file names. Yeah, Phil says the date. The date was the problem. The time was also a problem. Colons are a character that's used in Mac OS as a separator character between colons and a file path. Slashes give problems to, well, to the Mac as well, as we'll see here in a second. You're not supposed to use forward slashes in Unix or Linux file paths. So we've got to clear out those problem characters. And the way we're going to do that is by using the substitute function. Let's solve the problem. Okay, close this up and we'll get back into our script workspace. And we need to change our file path to not include any of those illegal characters. So I'm going to double click on that statement, go into write the calculation a little bit better. And let's do this. Let's add another line here in the variable declaration section of our let statement that says, okay, you've generated this name, but there were some problems in what you gave me. There's some illegal characters included in dates and times and potentially even in the name of the layout, right? Because we're not limited in how we name our layouts. We could use colons in layout names, forward slashes, backslashes, other characters that are illegal in file names, but that are legal in FileMaker layout names. So let's say, hey, let's recreate that name variable, or in other words, finesse it a little bit using the substitute function. The substitute function is like your search and replace command in software applications. We'll say, take the text that's currently in the name variable and search for colons. Now, a colon is a literal character, so it's got to be enclosed in quotation marks. And replace every colon that you find with maybe a dash instead. Dashes are going to look fine there, right? Will that solve the problem? Well, it'll partly solve the problem. It'll change our colons to dashes. So let's go with that. I'll save the script. We'll run it again. And let me get the debugger showing so we can see as it goes. And we'll go a little more quickly this time. Boom, boom, boom. There, good. Generate, sort, page setup, go to preview mode, size and center the window, which pushes it over, and we'll move it back here. Then we'll run through the output script step. I'll get the data viewer showing, and we'll see what that, we'll see what that file name comes up as, right? There we go. We're going to generate the file path, and notice how in the time portion, it changed the colons to dashes. Outstanding, just like we said we wanted it to do. But these forward slashes are still going to give it some fits. So as I say OK and go ahead and try to run the save records as PDF script step, we get an error 800. Okay, so we've got to take care of those slashes as well, and maybe any other potentially illegal characters. And there's a clever little variation on the substitute function that allows you to run multiple substitutions. See, on its face, the substitute function says, within this text, change all of these, any of these that you find, into those. But let's say there are multiple substitutions you want to make. You can kind of hotwire the substitute function to make multiple substitutions by simply wrapping each substitution pair inside square brackets, and then using semicolons to separate each square bracketed passage from the next. So I've just added a semicolon there, and now we're going to start up another square bracketed section, and we'll say, hey, change all of those forward slashes, in quotes, semicolon, to dashes also, and then end the square bracket. Okay. Any other illegal characters? Well, you could just continue on in like manner. Semicolon, square bracket. Let's say we don't care for spaces in our file names. Maybe we want the spaces to become underscores. So we'll do that. Let me widen this out so it is easier to read there. So now we're going to make 3 substitution pairs in one statement. Change colons to dashes, change forward slashes to dashes, change spaces to underscores, and you could just continue on in like manner for any illegal characters that you suspect. Now we'll say OK, and OK again, and I'll save the script. We'll close this version of the report, and actually I know that it's going to work, so I'm not even going to turn on the script debugger. We'll go actions, and we'll run the script, and I'll say yes, I want a PDF of this report. Boom. And no error message appears. And my PDF software program is opening up. Let's see if I can find it somewhere. It should be opening up. Well, now I told you that it was going to work, but it didn't seem like it worked. All right, let's run our script again with the debugger running. Okay, there and there. Good, go, go, go. Sort. Size and center of the window, that moves it here. And then run the output report. Good, we want to view a PDF. Okay. And it's going to generate our file path, which is going to look like this. Okay, so look at that. We got nice. Spaces became underscores right there, dashes. I don't see any illegal characters. That ought to work. Let's see what happens. And step into. Yeah, we didn't get an error code number generated. Well, we did, code number 0, which means no error. So it seems like it ought to have worked. Perhaps I just simply didn't turn on the automatically open option like I thought I did. Let's go and make that happen. Save record as PDF. Yeah, that was my problem. I simply didn't turn on automatically open file. There we go. And we'll save and run our script again. Right. It generates the report in preview mode, asks what we want to display. Let's make a PDF of it. And Acrobat launches or is launching. See if I can get it to come to the front. Come on, Acrobat. I need you in front here. There, it's coming. And there's our PDF. Fantastic. And it's viewing at a size that will adjust based on the window size. Looks great. Okay, well, we're a minute over time. Not bad. Better than some weeks. Any questions before we conclude this session? Thank you all for being here, by the way.